What's going on, guys? This is the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat.
And I'm Posh.
And we're hanging out today with Peiman Raf. Is it Raf?
Yeah.
Peiman Raf. Peiman, thanks for being on the show, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to learn more about your story. And you guys have built an amazing brand, and we're excited to learn more about that. But before we do, let's take it back to like your personal story and where you grew up and all that kind of stuff. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I was born in Italy in 1994. So I have a younger brother who I started Madhappy with. We were both born there. Our parents are from Iran, so they moved there during the revolution. Grew up there, moved to LA when I was 6, and my brother was 4, so in 2000. And then grew up in LA most of my life. Went to college at Michigan. Graduated 2016, and around 2017 was when we launched Madhappy.
Why did your parents decide to? Because my parents are actually from Iran too. I'm Armenian, but it's funny because they went there, and then my mom went to Spain, my dad went to England, and then they came here. Was that what the reason they went to Italy, just to kind of
similar? Yeah. I think it's kind of random in a way, in that like people weren't fully choosing where they were going. They were kind of going where like my mom's brother happened to be there, and my dad had a relative there, so they just happened to go there, and they didn't even really have an idea of for sure coming to the U.S. I think a lot of my mom's family living here, like, and the opportunity that there would be for like my brother and me was like the ultimate reason we ended up coming. But definitely grateful for that.
Yeah. Was it tough for them, like that transition, or like for your family, like to pick up and leave from their home, I guess, like to come here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was like very hard. I was like 6, so it was like hard to see, but thinking back, like I can't imagine being in my like late 30s, early 40s, moving to like a new country where I don't speak the language. I think that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And they did that and like started their own business here, which is like amazing. And so
what did your parents do back in Iran, or like your family, I guess?
Yeah, so both my parents went to college in Italy, so their first jobs were in Italy after that. My dad studied architecture. My mom studied interior design, but they weren't doing that. They weren't doing that in Italy. They actually owned like a restaurant, a jewelry store, like a bunch of different things. And then when we moved here, they started working more in like what they studied. So doing like homes and apartment buildings, like the interior, so like kitchens, bathrooms, bringing everything from Italy. So like it's like a cool connection to what they grew up with.
When they came here, did they know what they were going to be doing? I mean, they obviously were coming to this new country and didn't really know, how the country really functioned, and what the societies looked like. What did they do when they first got here?
I think that it was lucky that a lot of my mom's family lived here, and actually my dad was really good friends with my mom's brother. That's how he met my mom. But he moved here first. So he was already working in the space. So they kind of started working together when he moved here. So it was like, at least that part of it was easier to transition because someone had been doing it for a couple of years now. But I'm sure that there was like a lot of like doubt and uncertainty around everything they were doing.
Growing up, even as you were kind of in your teenage years, did you see the work that your parents were doing as entrepreneurs, or as almost immigrant entrepreneurs? I mean, did that ever resonate with you, or is it something that you more so looked back now and realized, oh, okay, like this made sense, this makes sense, wow, I see that in myself right now?
Yeah, I think it was interesting because I definitely saw my parents working like super hard, and also like I kind of always felt like I had like some like chip on my shoulder because like I moved here, like I didn't speak English when I was in like first grade, and so I didn't like immediately like fit in. So I think that was like definitely like a part of like something that like grew within me as I got older. It wasn't something that like I was like, oh, like I know what this feeling is. But like, it was like more of a unique situation. Of course, there's like so many like Persians in LA, but like it was a little bit different in that like I was born in Italy and like I moved here and like I couldn't speak English and like I spoke Farsi and like all these different things. And but I think like ultimately like it really like helped me and my brother just because like we have a pretty different perspective. And of course like we grew up in LA for the most part, but I think like having that has been helpful for sure.
Going deeper into that though, I mean, I feel like we've talked to several people that have similar stories, but I really want to kind of go deep on this topic is, why do you think that chip on your shoulder existed? Like, I mean, like, okay, you're like an immigrant. Who cares? Like, a lot of people are. Why did you think that you had a chip on your shoulder and that you had something to prove?
Yeah, It's a good question. I don't think it's like the chip on your shoulder thing. I don't really think it's like something you like choose to have or not. I think like just the way I've been like ever since I was pretty young, I was always like pretty type A, like just trying to like get the best grades, like perform really well, like and it was more like an internal thing versus like trying to like do something good that my parents would like. And I think like as I got older, I kind of realized, oh, like why am I like trying so hard? Like, you know, like why am I so motivated to do these things? And I think
Like
some
for
of it,
what? Like what's
yeah,
the
yeah,
purpose?
like what's the purpose? Like it's very like when you're young, it's like, oh, you're doing it because like you think, oh, I have to get good grades or
Right. A
whatever.
lot of it
But
comes from parents, like and
yeah,
the
some
pressure
comes from
and that kind of
parents,
stuff.
and then but then like even now, like I think like one of my things for better or worse is like I'm very like competitive. And I think I've gotten better at like balancing that, but kind of realized that like I think a lot of it was like just like feeling like I was like very different or like less than like a lot of the people that were my friends growing up or whatever, and like they had lived here for so many years and like they were doing their own thing and like whatever. And I think for me it was like that was like a big motivating factor. But I think just came about as I continued to grow up, and still with me today, obviously.
Was there ever like a situation when you were like just kind of young in elementary school, you just moved here where I don't know, someone just didn't treat you right or something where you're like, oh, I get it. Like I gotta kind of look out for myself and really like, yeah, maybe like that kind of explains the chip on
Yeah,
the
I mean, I
shoulder thing.
think that like for the most part, everyone's really nice, and like the people I became friends with in like first and second grade are like still my best friends today, which is pretty crazy. Like, it was one of my friends' birthdays yesterday, and like 15 of us have been friends since
That's
like
awesome.
first grade, which is like
Which
pretty
is
unique.
it's also rare, yeah.
Yeah,
Like a lot of times you guys kind of, I mean, people kind of go their own separate
Yeah,
path, especially after high school.
of course it's happened with some of our friends, but I think like that's very unique, and I'm very grateful for that. I think some of it was like definitely like I did have experiences growing up where like I would be like speaking Farsi or Italian because I didn't speak English, and like I would just like feel like weird or like not the same as people. I don't really remember those specific things, but definitely like stuff happened that like got in my brain or subconscious and like led to like me like having those feelings probably.
You mentioned you're really competitive. Did you play any sports when you were a kid?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I played soccer, basketball, all those things,
Yeah.
and then in high school, played basketball. So like, was super passionate about that, and we were pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about like high school. What did you kind of know what you wanted to do after high school? Did you have an idea and where did that come from? Was it kind of just out of your own, wanting to do it, or I don't know, was there pressure from society, parents?
For sure. Again, I think like everything with school, like I was always like very type A, like trying to do really well, trying to get all A's, trying to get into the best schools. So that was kind of like on myself. Applied to a bunch of schools. I actually growing up, like for whatever reason, I like really wanted to go to Stanford. And I applied early there. I didn't get in. I was like crushed, like December of like 2011.
This is from high school?
Yeah.
And just to cut you off, sorry to cut you off, but just to kind of thing on that, why do you think that was? Like, why? I know you said it was from yourself, like internally you wanted to do really well and all that. Why do you think that was? Like, did you ever find out, I guess back then, what that purpose was that you really were working towards?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like I obviously wanted my parents to be proud and all of those sorts of things. And I think just wanted to have a quote unquote successful life, or felt like that was like the next step I needed to take. Like I think growing up, like I was very like rigid, and like I was like, oh, like I need to get good grades, then I go to a good school, then I get a good job, and like follow this specific path, which like ultimately like it changed a lot from that.
Yeah, of course. It always does, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that growing up, like I only knew one way, so I was like, oh, like I have to get really good grades. Like this is what I'm doing right now. And it wasn't even like a thing. Like I was lucky that like school like came more easily to me, so it wasn't like something that was like overburdensome at all. And like it was just like part of like who I was, and like most of my friends were like similar. And then I think like not getting into Stanford and some of those types of schools, I was like kind of like taken back because it was like a mini like failure in a way, like for me at least. And then just like from there, like I think got into Michigan and loved the school and felt like it was like the next best step for me, and really like grateful I made that choice.
Was it a shocking transition going from LA to Michigan?
Not really, honestly. I think definitely like those like homesick type feelings of like going to like a new state, and I didn't really have older people that I knew there, and I think that's helpful for a lot of people when you know someone that goes there. But luckily, like 4 or 5 kids, and 2 of which were like my really good friends, also went to Michigan my year. So that really helped.
You did business there, right?
Yeah, so I studied business there, and it's an amazing business school,
Yeah.
but also just like it's a very well-rounded school. So anyone you meet that goes to Michigan, for the most part, like only has really good things to say and like really cares about other people that went to Michigan, which isn't really true about a lot of other schools. So I think going there instead of like the other things I was thinking about, schools I was thinking about going to, like ultimately ended up being like one of the best things that like ever happened to
Yeah.
me.
And were you dead set on like studying business and that's what you wanted to do? There was nothing else that you were thinking about?
Yeah, I think like I also had like a very like narrow mindset growing up as well. Like I knew I didn't want to be a doctor or lawyer or any of those like specific paths.
Yeah.
It just like seemed so like boring to me. Like not didn't have anything against it and took all like the science classes and all that. But I was just like, this really isn't for me. And business seemed like a good path in that like it didn't limit you in any specific ways. Thinking back, like I was also closed minded. I didn't like
Yeah.
computer science and all these things that I should have thought about. Like
Yeah.
I didn't even think about.
Yeah. What would you have done? Like going back, would you have done things differently? Like would you have studied a different major?
Yeah, maybe like something like computer science, I think is like so valuable, and like the stuff you learn in like a business degree, like is like you can learn that stuff pretty easily
I
yourself.
went to business school too.
Yeah.
So I'm laughing. I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's just like the stuff like like any of the stuff we've done at Madhappy hasn't really been like directly related to what I learned in business school. Of course, like the basic accounting and finance stuff is important, but I think like if you can get through like a computer science degree, like you can learn like how to do.
I feel like it's more like the way of thinking, right? Like that you really take away. I don't know if it was the same for you, but like the actual topical stuff, like the content, a lot of it's like in a way outdated, like marketing classes and that kind of stuff. Unless you're working on like real world things, a lot of that stuff, it's just kind of like the approach, right? That you take and like in the real world, maybe you can see things a little quicker than if you didn't know. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I think like the best thing about Ross was also like the school itself was like a smaller part of Michigan. So it was like pretty tight knit community. Like most of the people were like very smart. The teachers were great. So like you're still exposed to whether it was through cases or different like activities you were doing, like the stuff that like you really carried with you, right? Like how to work in these teams, right? Like there's a lot of like team building activities and stuff like that is more relevant to what I'm doing now than any of the more like topical stuff.
What was your biggest takeaway from college?
Yeah, I think it really wasn't the school stuff. It was just like more like I feel like everywhere that like I went, like I tried to like be really good in that place. So like in high school, I got really good at school, and I was good at like I was on the basketball team and all that. And like it's a lot harder to do that at like a school like Michigan. So I think balancing like the fraternity I was in, also like having like a great time and like being able to like visit all these other schools, like doing like a little China abroad thing for 3 weeks over the summer, like things like that were, and the people I met were like everything, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing is, especially a school like Michigan, like the network and not of just the people you go to school with, but like of the alumni and the people that like care and want you to succeed, like has like helped me like every day and like Madhappy today.
Did you back then while you were at Michigan do any sort of pragmatic experience type activities that were directly related to business? So did you ever get a business internship or anything like that was able to give you the know-how of how to start or how to run a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think so internship wise, like I interned at a few like incubator type VC places. I think from
In
like
Michigan?
no, like during the summers, like nothing really directly at Michigan because like I always knew I wanted to start my own company, but it wasn't like I never really thought I would start one like out of college. So I wasn't really like optimizing for that. But I think like I always love like the venture world and stuff like that, and startups were very interesting to me. So I think like working at some of those companies gave me like some view into it, but again, like nothing that like really like compared at all to when we started.
So what path were you on? I mean, were you on the finance path or?
Yeah, so finance. So basically, Ross for the most part, the school like almost everyone does like either investment banking or consulting or one of these.
It's like
things.
it's the same. I went to Marshall USC. And it's like
exactly.
Everyone.
Yeah. So I actually when I graduated, I was doing banking in New York.
Yeah. Like a summer, like you were like a summer analyst.
I did a summer analyst, and then that was actually my first job out of college that I
cool.
did for a bit. And then, long story short, ended up moving back before we started Madhappy. But
but like, so how did you got that job, and was the idea you were gonna just stay there for like a couple of years and then move on?
Yeah,
that's generally what happened.
For sure,
right?
yeah. The idea was 2 years, then private equity and blah blah blah. I think that I think I learned like just like now that like it was like I felt like that was another part of like the path, right? Like I have to do this and I have to do this, and it's just like really doesn't make sense. And I think like a lot of lucky things happened for us to start Madhappy, but if it didn't happen, like I could have easily still been on like some type of path like that.
I
Yeah.
assume you hated investment banking.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say that like I hated it and that's why I left. I would definitely say it's not like a very like inspiring job at all. And I didn't even do it for long enough to be like, oh my God, like this is like the worst thing ever, right? Like
Yeah.
within a few months, I basically like got pretty sick. Like I was like feeling like very sick, so I came home for a little.
Were you like,
and-
was it like a matter of just like not sleeping and working
so
a lot?
yeah,
or-
so that's like that's what everyone thinks, and it was like kind of like not even that. I was just like not feeling like myself, and it was like the
Gotcha.
first time I'd ever like I was like really tired all the time. I was just like fell out of it, like kind of weak. So I came home for a little, like kind of around Thanksgiving ish, and I was just trying to get better, going to doctors, like try to figure
It's
it
like
out.
3 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
This is your first year in investment banking?
Yeah, so I started working in June.
Okay.
And I came home like I think like late October. And I was like, all right, like I'll take a couple weeks, like I'll get better and I'll go back. And it's just like couldn't figure it out. The doctors were like, oh, nothing's wrong. Like I was like couldn't figure it out for over a month. And then like going into like the holidays that year, like I was like, I honestly like don't think it's like the right move for me to go back. Like I was like very scared that like I was starting to feel a little better, but I was like, if I go and it gets worse and blah,
Was
blah,
it just
blah.
like this feeling in your stomach?
It was more like it was definitely like a
Like I meant like more so not the illness itself, but like just this feeling that you had that
Yeah.
you shouldn't go back.
yeah, like in a way, like I think when I left, like I kind of knew that I wasn't going back,
Right.
like deep down.
Right.
And I think, of course, like I was in my own head and I didn't know what was wrong. And it was the first time in my life where I felt like I was like really failing, right? Like I was leaving my apartment in New York with my friends from school, and I was like basically like quitting this job. But I think soon after, like around December, like I said, like was like the first time we ended up like talking about Madhappy and talking to my brother and Mason and all of that. But that only happened because like I happened to be home and
Yeah.
I didn't really know what I would be doing next and all of that. So I think that that's really how that came to be.
Yeah, and before we get into Madhappy, did you ever like figure out, or I guess think about like what that was, like what you were feeling, like what was it? I guess if you can explain it.
Yeah. So I was having like very much like mono like symptoms.
Okay.
So if you guys are familiar, but
Yeah.
there's like a whole category of like this like chronic fatigue type stuff that's like very hard to diagnose. So it's like almost impossible for you to go to a doctor and like them tell you exactly what's wrong.
Right.
So like really the only things that I could do was kind of wait it out and sleep a lot, eat well, and just try to improve that way, right? Like I was doing like all sorts of like acupuncture and random stuff really like and so I don't think I'll ever really know exactly what it was.
But do you think it was because of like the investment banking lifestyle,
I
or
don't
was
think
it?
I don't think so yet because like it hadn't even been that long,
Right.
And it wasn't like
Yeah.
I was super sleep deprived when I
And you're like
moved
a
back.
young guy, like
yeah,
shouldn't.
I was
yeah.
like super young, and like the summer before when I was working at the bank as well, like it was great. Like I was like
Yeah.
going out, it was really fun. Like I was like with my friends, and when I moved to New York, I had already been like feeling off a bit, and I was like tired and during training and stuff like that. So it was a little bit different, and I really don't want to blame like the company at all because like it wasn't something like that.
It's just nature's way of bringing you back home.
Yeah, I honestly like do think so, and it sounds obviously a little bit like woo woo or whatever,
Yeah,
but
whatever.
but that's really what I think.
So when did the idea for Madhappy first come? I mean, or what was that idea, or what was that discussion with your brother and Mason?
For sure. So I think the background on that is that my brother and Mason. So Mason's been my friend for like 10-ish years. Him and
From
my
high school?
Yeah, from high school. Him and my brother became friends because they were both very much into clothing, and they started a brand together in high school, like high-end men's stuff, like basics, leather jackets, a bunch of stuff. Just because they were super interested in it, and they weren't very like school oriented. So they just wanted to do their own thing and like figure out their own path. That was more of like a passion project. Didn't really work out just because they didn't have the resources, and they were
just kind of selling in
16,
person
17.
in high school, or
in person, also like to a
online?
few stores.
Okay.
Like more like wholesale. They had an online website, so they had all those things. But it was like a little project they did in high school. And when I graduated Michigan and I was working in banking, like I was like my brother and Mason were still kind of trying to find their thing, right? Like my brother didn't go to college, Mason didn't finish college, and so they were trying to figure it out. And Mason had thought of this name, Madhappy, right? So this was around like September of October of the same year I came home.
2016
And
or 20?
yeah, 2016.
And sorry, when you came home, you didn't really like you didn't know what you're gonna do next.
No,
right?
no.
You were just kind of like
It was like-
what I do know is I'm not going back, but I'll figure.
It was like get better and figure it out and get a job in LA. That was like the extent of it.
Got it.
And so my brother, so Mason had thought of this name Madhappy. He basically was at one of our friends' last like basketball games at Pepperdine, and he like texted him like, "I'm mad happy for you," like just randomly. And then he like sent my brother the name, and like they really liked it.
And was
So-
the idea like it's gonna be a clothing brand, or
No,
was it just I like the
so
name?
then my brother, like a few weeks later was like still like trying to find his way, like didn't know what he wanted to do, and was like, yeah, like I'm interested in like looking more into this thing. Like we want to make some hats and some hoodies and stuff like that with this name. So like I gave them a little money. This was like right before I moved back. And they just started like working on it very like slowly and just trying to figure out, okay, like is there something we want to do? And I guess can get into like how we actually started. But that winter when I was feeling better, we also had our fourth co-founder, Josh, who was roommates with my brother's best friend. So that's how we knew each other. He had heard that we were starting something and wanted to be involved. And he was still a junior in college at the time. And he's my brother's age. So my brother also would have been a junior. And so we're all happened to like be skiing in the same place that winter and like all talked about it for the first time. And then that's really what kicked off 2017 and starting the brand.
Were your parents supportive of your brother kind of not going to college and just being on this entrepreneurial path, or were they more so disappointed that, hey, our older son did it and, you know, you should have at least followed suit for a little bit?
I think that with parents, it's really hard when like you have one, like I was like the first kid, right? And anytime like that's like the bar you set.
Yeah.
So like even if he loved school, but he was like 20-30% worse, it would look much worse than that. And so I think that was kind of a shock to them because one, they weren't really used to like the American culture of things, right? And like I personally didn't drink in high school or didn't smoke in high school or like the things that most kids are doing. So I think some of the stuff when my brother was doing it was a little bit harder for them to manage. But I think we're very lucky that like our parents are very open-minded, and it wasn't so much that like they needed him to go to college, but it was more like that he's not just like fucking around basically. So I think like that was hard for my brother because like he was still a good kid at the end of the day. He was just trying to figure out what his path was, and so he was going to SMC and you know just like to please my parents kind of.
Yeah.
But he really like wasn't fulfilled at all. And it wasn't until he started interning for this guy Ugo, who's a really big stylist at the time. And my brother was just interested in the space and started helping him out. And at the time he was like styling Travis Scott, Justin Bieber, a bunch of people. And he was only like a 21-year-old Nigerian guy. And so my brother started learning from there, and that was kind of his school. And then Ugo started to give my brother clients that he didn't really want to take on. And that was how my brother started like being more active and doing things. And up until the point of like really as we were starting Madhappy, my brother was on tour with like this band 5 Seconds of Summer, like styling them full time. And so
how old is he at this point? 21?
Yeah, so my brother's 2 years younger than me. So when we started Madhappy, he was only 20. Which is pretty crazy. Yeah. He turned 21 in 2017.
Like he would have been in college at that time, but he was like touring the world and styling.
Yeah. So when he was styling, he would have been like a junior in college. And so it was pretty cool. And like I think my parents then understood that it was like a real thing that he was doing, and it wasn't like that he was just fucking around basically, right? And so ultimately like we're okay with him not finishing school. And yeah, I think like school is very different. Like it's like you have to kind of be fit for that mold, or else it like doesn't work for you. Like sure, he could have got a degree, but like that wasn't gonna.
Yeah, and it's also the you know, another way of looking at it is like, why go waste all that money and time when if it's not for you, just like go out and work and build experience, because you'll be ahead of the game that way.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, you guys are skiing, and you guys come up.
Yeah.
You guys have this conversation between the four of you. What was that conversation? What did you guys talk about at that time?
Yeah. So I guess we all knew we wanted to like start something. At the time, like we had the name, and we had a couple initial products just in general, like off of like blanks that we were producing on, nothing that we were cutting and sewing ourselves. And that was like the first time we got together with Josh as well, because he was from New York and he was going to Georgetown at the time. And
What did Josh do? Like, what was his
right, yeah.
background?
So his background was he was also like very young, my brother's age. So he was like in college, right? And he just really wanted to like start something as well. And I think that he saw it as a cool opportunity. And so we kind of decided us four would start it together in a way. Again, like at the time, it wasn't like I knew that this is what I was going to be doing. It was more like, oh, like let me just help them out while I'm still getting better and figuring out what I'm going to do next. And of course, like it eventually transitioned to like, oh, this is like a real thing. But
When you guys were like talking about it, how developed was the idea? Like, how deep did it go? And or was it just, hey, we have this name, we like it, let's just make some clothing out of it?
yeah, that was it. That was really it.
There was no mission.
No, I think so. So what we did have was like we had a name and like a more like vibe and like the positivity and optimism that we wanted to push. But we didn't really know, okay, like we're gonna launch online, then we're gonna do pop-ups, then we're gonna start doing larger scale events and start doing things in the mental health space. I think some of these things grew out of the reaction to what we were doing, and like just chance things that we happened to do early on in the company.
But what was that early on? Like, I mean, even after that initial conversation, was the goal, hey, let's just make products and sell it? Like, that's it?
So-
Like, how are you different than any other brand?
Yeah, so the first thing we did was, we wanted to release product, and what we were doing was we came out with a few hats, a few T-shirts, a couple hoodies,
And it was just Madhappy on there.
and it was just Madhappy on there. But everything had like that stitching that we have like on our hoods now, in like different places. Like the T-shirts had it, and that was a more unique thing, right? So we had this name that we knew was like very catchy and people would like, and also like if you see the clothes and you see the hoodie, like you see like the stitching, so you're like, oh, what is that? But those were like the initial two things that like we had on our product that was more unique.
And who was like the one designing it?
Yeah, so my brother and Mason work primarily on the creative, and at the time he wasn't working for us full time, but our friend Chuck, who we went to high school with, and who was always helping Mason and my brother with like different design things, helped on the design front, like on the graphic side.
Something we hear a lot, like from investors and just kind of people who are like studying startups and, you know, really kind of get in the weeds and like try to extract what makes startups successful and that kind of stuff. On the topic of like kind of co-founders and bring, you know, like who are the people starting the business, like they always say like bring something to the table that's like different than the other person and that kind of stuff. How did that dynamic work between four of you? Like, was it a clear, like each one of you brought something different to the table, or was there kind of like you know, a conversation like how are we going to split these roles and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think earlier on, again, like we didn't know that all of us would still be doing this, right? Like I said, like when we started, like I wasn't sure what I would be doing next. And so, of course, like the reasoning was like, oh, like all four of us, we do think we're bringing something different. With like me and Josh being more like business operations, Mason and my brother being more like design and creative and all that. But it wasn't something we thought about a lot, to be honest. Like obviously having four co-founders is a lot.
Yeah.
And the more co-founders you add, like the more opportunity for just things to go wrong and different dynamics to take place.
Or just like never making a decision.
So I think earlier on it wasn't a conscious decision that we made, but then as we continued to grow and be around as a company, it started to take shape in different ways.
So you guys are selling product, and then what? I mean, you guys have this website up. How do you get the word out there?
Yeah, so
Do you guys have already like an established network that you guys got it out to? I mean, what was that like the first few days like?
yeah, so I think like we're very lucky to have friends and family that were supporting earlier on, and again,
Financially, or
no, not really financially. So to start the business, we put in like 20,000 total.
and that was to what, buy inventory?
Yeah, really just to buy inventory basically. And so we produced as much as we could. We launched online, and got, did some sales to friends.
What
and
were like the
family
initial items like you carried? Was it
Yeah,
like
so it was like
shirts?
3 hats, like 2 T-shirts, and like 3 different hoodies. Again, all like blanks that we had bought and just like embroidered on,
Right.
and did the stitching. But then earlier on, like we were like we want to do some like in real life experiences as well. So we did our first like pop up for like a few weeks on Robertson, and that was like a cool way in that like one, we didn't really have enough inventory to like do a lot of sales. So like most of the stuff was sold out like really early on, but it let us have a place where we could throw a 500 person party and tell all of our friends and really start getting the word out, because people would come and they would share it and all that sort of stuff.
And what were you guys like pushing at that time? Was it just like, hey, we have a brand, or was it again more than that? Like,
Yeah, so it was more like, again, like earlier on, like we made decisions to like not charge for parties, like let have everything at the parties be free. So everyone was coming and like having a great time, and because like we didn't even have like that much product to sell, it wasn't really about the product. It was more about like the community around the brand, like just like come have fun with your friends. That was it, and you didn't have to like buy anything to come. You didn't have to do any sort of stuff like that. So I think that set the foundation for what we ended up doing and how now we formalized it.
Taking it back to, the initial money that you guys put in, I know a lot of our listeners, we always get questions like, what are the best ways to raise funding or start a company, right? We've had people go the VC route. We've had people go the friends, family, fools route, whatever it may be. I know you mentioned friends, family. What was that conversation like with them? I mean, why did they even help you out? What did you tell them? What was the story?
Yeah, so in terms of like, if you're referring to like the initial 20,000, that was just like money that like we put in ourselves.
Just had saved up.
Yeah, so it wasn't really like that we raised money to start.
Right.
And I think especially in apparel, like it doesn't really make sense to raise money before
Right.
you launch, because you really don't know what you have and which kinds of like twists and turns like the business is going to take. So for us, it was really like we had like 10, 15,000 that we could work with, that we were just producing as much product as we could with, and then just rolling it back and producing more and producing more. So that's kind of the route we took.
just kind of taking money from sales and putting it back into production.
Like basically all the money. And
Right.
yeah.
At what point do you guys take it from just being, the people that are making clothes to actually developing the brand? Or was that a day one type thing?
Yeah, I think in general, like day one, we were like, my brother and Mason and Chuck were very like focused on like creating the brand in a specific way. I think like that summer was when we released like another like of our first products on the first hoodie that we produced
This
ourselves.
summer 2017.
Yeah.
And at this point, do you have like a solid community that you've built just from the parties, or was it still
No, so like we had at that time we had thrown like 2 parties,
Okay.
Both in LA. So no, not really. We were getting support from LA and New York, just like different people that we knew and friends of the brand, but
Advertising or not advertising?
no advertising at all. And just everything basically done on like our social channels, like mainly Instagram. And then like that fall we did a pop-up in New York, and that was like more the first time where we released like a more like complete collection with our own products that we had produced, and through another big party did our first like panel on mental health there. So like that was when things started to take form in like that October timeline.
When was when did you guys decide, hey, this is not going to just be a clothing brand, it's going to be a platform for mental health? Like, was it kind of after that first kind of pop up, or
Yeah, so
timeline wise? Like,
yeah, so I think like in October we did like our first like ever panel, right? And it was really cool, and we saw people like really loved it, even though it was like a smaller scale event, like 75, 80 people. So we were like, oh, we want to do more of these. It wasn't like we had this like brain blast of like, oh no, now this is the thing. But I think over time and over our couple like a few pop-ups that we had in the following year, it started really to take form, and then wanted to start doing more in the space. So now, of course, like we have like we're doing like audio, like we're recording our podcast on it. We have a blog that's fully dedicated to it. We do a lot of releases around with different organizations in the space. So it's really like formed over time, and it wasn't something that like we knew day one, but we just saw that people really like felt passionate about it and wanted to be involved in it, and it was really like lacking in the conversation.
Was this something you were enjoying as somebody who had studied, business and was entering the finance world? Was entrepreneurship and just building this brand something that you personally, were taking liking to?
Yeah, for sure. I think like it was cool to have basically like all the decision making power, right? Like everything was in our own hands to be able to pick what we wanted to do, make our own mistakes, learn and grow. And I think it was unique because like I like challenges like that. Of course, like it was like new territory for all of us. Like we had never launched a real online store. We had never thrown an event. We had never thrown a pop-up. So I think these were all like new experiences that we were like learning as we were going. So it was really fun, of course, like while being like very stressful.
Yeah.
just to talk about that growth, I know you mentioned that first pop up. You guys obviously didn't have as much inventory, so you guys sold out. But when you guys started producing more inventory and releasing new stuff, I know that like the following summer you released a new line. Were you guys like always selling out, or was it kind of a slow kind of growth until was there like a moment where like everything just changed or
Yeah,
turned?
I think earlier on, like everything was selling out just due to the nature of like how little product there was. So even when we opened New York, like it was only open for like 2 or 3 weeks
Mm.
because like we made all the stuff and then it all sold out.
And when you say little, how little are we talking? How many pieces per SKU?
It's a good question, and I would really have to think back, but like
Are we talking like hundreds?
yeah, like hundreds of total, like 500-600 total units,
Yeah,
right?
got
Like in the store.
So not per SKU, like just complete like the
Yeah,
six,
well,
seven
we only
products,
had
yeah.
like 10-ish
Right.
SKUs,
So
right?
like 50 products
50 to
per,
100 max of
yeah,
each
got
thing.
it. And that was that a purposeful decision, or was it just like this is what we have money for? Like we don't really know
no,
what else to
it
do.
wasn't super purposeful, and I think like we definitely made a lot of mistakes there, and like the splits we were ordering, and not ordering more hoodies and sweats and all of that sort of stuff that we've gotten better at now. But I think for us it was just like produce as much as we could and like see what people like and try to grow and move on from there.
And who was your like when you guys were discussing this, whether while skiing or later on, like who was the audience that you were targeting? Like who was this product for?
For sure, I think like we had a cool mix of like the 16 to 24-ish year old, like kind of like the consumer we were at the time, especially, right? Like my brother and Josh were still like 21 at the time, like I was 23. So like designing and creating for like that sort of audience was natural to us because like it was product we
That was
loved.
you guys, yeah. What was the biggest challenge in those first 2 years, or first, I guess, year and a half?
Yeah, first year and a half, I would say like definitely on like the production side, right? Like we knew nothing about production and trying to work with good vendors and dealing with the challenges of producing clothes in LA or frankly anywhere, and then also just executing on the pop-ups was like challenging because like we were building them basically, right? So it was hard to do that and try to come out with clothes and try to do X releases per year or whatever. And I think that's just stuff you learn as you go along.
So I know that more recently, LVMH, for those that don't know, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, right?
Yeah.
They led a fundraising round for Madhappy. Why don't you give us the story and the background of how that all came to be?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And tell us also, for those that don't know, perhaps know, like what is LVMH and what business are they really in?
For sure. So around the end of last year, so like a little over a year and a half after we started, was the first time we thought about raising money, and we didn't really want to go the venture route, as like I previously mentioned, just didn't think it made sense for us. So it was really just about getting like strategic people, companies, groups that have like built amazing brands, right? So first we went to some people that had been helping us all along, like the Sweet Green founders and different people we knew within our own community. Then we would get introduced to a bunch more people, and in March closed a pretty cool round with just great investors that we thought could help us get to the next
March
stage.
2019.
Yeah, this year. And around the same time had started having some conversations with LVMH Ventures, like you mentioned. And in October, that part of the round was announced. But for us, it's just cool to have an investor that's very strategic and has built all of these amazing, so they own 70 plus very legacy luxury brands, and having them as we look to do more international and grow our footprint is like extremely helpful.
When I guess at this point, did you feel like you guys? I guess obviously you guys had enough like traction, but what were those conversations like? Like when you were like, okay, we got to start raising money. Like at this point, to get in money and funding and even like strategic advisors. I'm assuming you had to be at a place where you guys were doing really good in sales. Maybe not. I don't know. Like what?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in 2018 we did like around $1 million in sales, which was obviously a lot for us at the time. But really, when we were talking to any types of investors, it wasn't really about like what we had done in the past, right? Like nothing had really been like set up for like extreme success from then. So we just like were really pitching like the story around the community we think we had built, around the pop-ups we were doing, around we had threw a 2,000 person block party on Melrose Place, like just different ways that we were activating the community, especially like around like the mental health space. And then also just like on the product side, like how good the product was and how much effort we were putting into that and who was wearing it and who was sharing it and all that sort of stuff really is how we got people to buy into what we're doing on like a larger scale.
And I mean, it sounds like I'm a bad cop. I'm not trying to play that role, but what was it that attracted LVMH Ventures? I mean, these are, again, like you said, they own the top luxury brands in the world. They, from what I at least have known or have read, they don't really invest in a lot of like these new startup companies or startup fashion brands. And you guys are these young millennials, was that the reason why they invested? I mean, what for them, obviously we understand for you why it was strategic, but for them, why was Madhappy the right investment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think overall, and I don't know if I could comment specifically on them specifically, but we've really been like pushing this story and narrative we're building around like the community of Madhappy, and it's pretty unique in that other brands like it's hard for any brand to get like 2,000 people to come to an event on Melrose like on a Saturday night. And so seeing some of those things and then seeing what we were doing on the more like social mission side is I think what captured a lot of people early on. And of course, like you said, like it's pretty rare for these super established companies to be investing at an early stage. But I think just a combination of the timing of when we were building our brand and of course some things luckily going our way helped us get in the door. It's hard to say exactly why, and maybe in another scenario the same situation would not have played out like that. But I think we're just grateful that it did.
You guys have had a lot of big name people like wear your brand, and I know you mentioned that you guys weren't really doing any advertising. Was that all just kind of like people told them and they liked the idea, like the aesthetic, like the message behind it, and some of the names? I mean, like The Weeknd and Gigi Hadid, and I think I saw like Casey Musgraves, like some different. Like, how did that all come about?
Yeah, I think all of them a little bit differently. I think one is that, we felt like our product was really good and like fit a lot of people's aesthetic, and they would either ask about it or their stylist would. And that's how we would go about things. And then as we start to grow and have like a footprint in like different cities, right? Like people are walking into the LA store or the New York pop-up or the Aspen pop-up. So that's helpful. Yeah. And then like when people found out about like the larger mission and stuff, wanted to be more involved. So whether that's getting more involved on the product side, like we designed some stuff for Casey's tour, like you mentioned, just for fun and to help them out. And then as we move into next year and are doing a lot of content around mental health, it's like working with these like great people that have really big audiences on like telling cool stories there.
Yeah, obviously that's like a dream for any apparel brand to get like the biggest people in the world wearing your brand. I guess if for those who are like maybe have an idea for a brand and want to start something of their own, what would you say is like, I guess from what you've learned so far, like what is the right approach to take? I know like we talk a lot about community and that kind of stuff, but do you think that works for every brand? Like, do you think that every brand should take that same approach of building?
I think it just really depends like who the specific audience is that your product's made for. Like for us, like it made sense to take that approach because it's like Madhappy. It's a very inclusive brand. We want everyone to come to our stores. We want them to have fun at the parties. We want them to support the collaborations we're releasing and that sort of stuff. So I think the first thing is like who the audience ends up being. Like some of this stuff is like I can't think back to how we were thinking about it at the time because like we really didn't know anything back then and we still don't. But I think that ends up being the most like important thing, right? Like if you're creating a very luxury brand, like it's much harder to have an initial community around it that people are not spending $3,000 on your jacket, and there's not that many of those people that are going to just buy your brand early on. So it's really about like taking like the right strategic steps based on the price point and where you want to be seen and who you want to be wearing your product. So I think it's just very dependent on the specific brand.
I'm curious. Obviously, I could see the correlation between Madhappy and mental health in terms of just even the word itself.
Yes,
but was there any particular reason for you or any of the other co-founders that mental health was such a big topic and such a big social issue that you as a team wanted to advocate for and build a company really around in terms of the content and whatnot? I mean, there's so many other social issues, especially in LA, homelessness and housing and all these different things. Obviously mental health is a huge issue, but was there any personal connection?
Yeah, definitely. So I think you made a great point that like one like Mad Happy is like very much in the name of it is like trying to promote mental health or even just like get you thinking about it. I think early on, Mason, who I mentioned had been my friend in high
Yeah.
school, had dealt with a lot of mental health challenges his whole life, and that was like my first friend I ever spoke about mental health with. And so it was very fitting that he had thought of the name, and it made a lot of sense for us to create the brand around that optimism and positivity while being able to talk about the larger
Right.
conversation around you're going to have ups and downs in life, and it's about being optimistic despite those things instead of like always being happy all the time. And I think that really resonated with us. And then when we started doing programming, we saw was resonating with other people. And as like social media was going crazy and like all the bullying that was going on and the celebrity suicides and the fact that this is such a big issue that had not been talked about for so long and is now becoming like a really like central part of the conversation, we felt like there's been no brand that has talked about mental health in a very like authentic way without just throwing like stats in your face. And so we felt like we could be that brand.
As far as where things go from now, obviously you guys are still super early in just this whole like process and building the brand. I guess what like if you could look 5 years in advance, like the vision that you have, like how do you see Madhappy continuing to stay on the forefront and building like this? Like it's just also like ties into like brands like Louis Vuitton and like that have been able to stick around for to such a long time. Except yours has like a very deep message behind it.
Yeah.
So I can imagine. I mean, that's obviously a big issue that isn't going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a thing. So how do you see that rolling out?
Yeah, I think for us, like we're just trying to continue to do like bigger and better things, and continue like being and making the right moves for our brand. I think one thing we did early on was set a really high bar with all the collaborations we do and all the partnerships we do and where all our pop-ups are. And I think that high bar has put us in a good spot because now as we continue to branch out with more international stuff and bigger and better collaborations, like there's like that trajectory of where the brand's going, right? And I think that that's how we see it rolling out and getting more into like not just the clothing stuff, right? But like the content around mental health and just optimism and happiness in general is like another layer to our brand that can live without just the clothes as well, right? So we think like those are some of the important and key ways that like we can keep doing bigger and better things because of course it's like hard to be quote unquote relevant for like forever, right?
Right.
And I think like our
A lot of
challenge-
clothing brands, have like a high rise and then like even steeper decline.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think like one thing that we were wary of early on is like we knew people would wear the brand because like the name's really good and stuff, but like if they were going to keep wearing it, like the product would also have to be really good. And
Right.
we're not, no offense, but we're not printing on like Gildan hoodies and,
Yeah.
and just like trying to sell like a bullshit product. Like we really believe in our product and we think it's some of the best stuff out. And so that combination of how we've been doing things, I think will keep us going.
As a young guy, I mean, you're what, 25 years old?
Yeah.
How has your life changed in terms of being somebody who's just a student recently? And I mean, I think that we're always all students,
Right.
but to becoming more of a leader, right? To becoming, a leader of people on your team, becoming a leader in this space in terms of not only fashion but mental health. I mean, it's a complete, mental shift, right? Like, how has that transition been for you?
Yeah, definitely hard. I think that when you're starting a brand or when you're starting any company, like the initial stuff is more around like, can you operate and can you get this product out and all of that. But then as you start growing, it becomes more of like the leadership aspect of like raising money or managing a team or hiring or all these different topics. And I think that's not something that I think thought about earlier on. And I think now it's so important, right? As we hire, building the right culture, as we grow the company, having the right leadership in place and the right management processes that like you're not really thinking about when you're just starting a brand because it's like four of us and we're just doing everything. But I think a big shift and I think it's like a cool challenge that like I enjoy taking on.
Right.
So that's kind of what makes the job fun and fulfilling. But of course, like there's very like dark moments in like any company you start, right? Like it is very stressful and like the responsibility is all on you. So that's like the harder stuff. And I think like people glorify like entrepreneurship now and like everyone thinks they need to start their own company and like talking about like the other side of it, just as we're doing in the mental health conversation is like really important. because it's not easy, right? And it's not like the glamorous stuff is only like a lot of the stuff is after the fact, and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So we're trying to do like our part and being able to talk about that side as well.
How do you keep your own mental sanity?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think like this year specifically, like we've gotten like so much more like busy than even we were last year, and trying to find a balance between working out, hanging out with friends, relaxing, hanging out with family, running this company is like really hard, and I don't think that it's really possible to ever be in like a perfect balance. So I think just trying to do my best and our team's best at like putting everyone in like good positions to like be successful. So trying to go to the gym every day or trying to just take some time to yourself every day. And I think our office being here helps because like there's like a gym here now and it's very convenient and now there's almost no excuse. But of course, like it's a challenge and like not something that I have figured out at all yet. And something that, especially going into 2020, like I want to make a focus because it's like we can't be pushing this like mental health conversation forward if we're not also fully engaged in doing our best. And two, also realizing that like there are a lot of ups and downs as we're going to continue building this. So we have to be ready to go for like the long haul, right? And it's not just like, it's not something that you could just sprint and be done. And this is going to like take a long time. So you have to like take care of yourself enough to be able to get there.
Fast forward, like, I don't know, like 60, 70 years, like looking back, like, you know, what is something that, you know, if you were to look back and say like, you know, if I did this, if Madhappy accomplished this, you know, I'll be happy. I'll die happy, Madhappy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for us, like, it's been a very fulfilling job and thing we've undertaken because like we don't really know exactly how things will turn out. And like if I go back to like last December, like I would have had no idea like all this stuff happened. So I think like we're trying less and less to like say exactly how we think it's going to play out because then we kind of like are underselling it too and like are not thinking about the full potential of what this could be. But I think for the most part, like we're going to be we're already very proud and happy about what we've been building. And I think it's just more like adding on top of that. And it's not really at the end of the day about like, if we make a lot of money off of it, like, of course that, like, you know, that would be great. This is a business at the end of the day, but it's also about like we're just trying to put ourselves in the best position for this company to be successful. And like, there's going to be other factors that like play a role in that. And we can't really control those.
For sure. All right, well, hey man, this has been awesome, dude. Like you guys definitely built an amazing brand in the last couple of years, and I'm sure that it's gonna be even bigger in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to like listen back to this
sure.
one day and be like, oh my god, like that makes total sense. Of like, I see where they're at now and the mindset that you know you and your team had at this very moment. So, thank you so much for being on the show and blessing the pod, and we're excited to see where Madhappy goes and you guys go from here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.